I'll let you in on a secret. Sometimes, on a Sunday, I'm preaching the sermon that I might need to hear at the moment. The sermon that I would preach to an empty sanctuary, even if no one were here, just because it's the message that's in my bones. And I do that because I figure I'm not so much different than anybody else. And that if I'm feeling something, there's a decent chance that some of you might be feeling that thing as well. So I preach to myself in hopes that my message proves useful to you. And what I'm feeling in my bones right now is a little discouraged, if I'm honest. Not with my life, not with our church, but with the state of the world. And of my iPad. I tend to be optimistic. I tend to feel that many, not all, but many problems can be solved, that many hurts can be healed, many hopes realized. I've always felt that most people deep down are generally good, and that the glass is half full, and that dark clouds have silver linings. And I don't feel that this is collectively, humanly, our finest hour right now. There's a Latin phrase called spiritus mundi. It translates to world spirit. And as I look at our world spirit right now, it doesn't seem like a spirit of generosity is ascendant, or a spirit of cooperation or understanding. I've seen times when the reservoirs of compassion seemed a little or a lot fuller than they do right now. It's like we're in the midst of a compassion drought. It's a time when the work of the church is deeply, perhaps desperately needed, but as the need expands, the resources, both monetary and human, to meet that need stretch thin. And as I pondered that this week, it led me to imagine a new take on a familiar parable. Listen, a sower went out to sow. He went out to sow as he did each planting season, each year scattering some of last year's carefully saved seed in expectation of this year's harvest, each time hoping for, if not a banner year, a better year, in the way that one hopes for constant improvement. A year that would replenish the barns after last year's drought. A year that might produce a crop to provide for his own family and also for his brother's family, this being their first harvest season without him. A sower went out to sow with a lot on his mind. This year especially, he was looking at the soil. He had developed an eye for it over time. Some years, if the winter rains had fallen often enough, it was almost as though the soil was expectant and humming and eager to bring forth life, like you could sow a seed or a hope or a dream, and it would spring instantly to vibrant and verdant growth. But not this year. He mopped his brow. The morning sun, hot for so early in the year, promised a scorcher later in the day. The soil this season seemed powdery and reluctant, but the sower went out to sow nevertheless. And he set out across the field using the technique of broadcast sowing, scattering handfuls of seed to fall where they may. And there was a rhythm to it as he walked with his satchel across his shoulder. Step, scoop, scatter. Step, scoop, scatter. And the motion was so repetitive and familiar that it took no real concentration. Usually he could just go absently about the task, but this year he noticed. Maybe it was because he had to reach a little deeper into the satchel to get to the seed. Or maybe it was the worrisome dryness of the soil. Or maybe it was because it felt like a lot was riding on this crop. But this year, instead of getting lost in his thoughts, his eye followed the scattering seed. Several handfuls of seed landed on a packed path crossing the field, and as if they had been waiting and watching and following, a flock of birds descended, and the seed was gobbled and gone, wasted. Worse yet, distracted by the birds, he had just sown several handfuls of precious seed in a rocky corner of the field where nothing ever grew well. It was like fool's gold. The seeds would germinate, and the gray ground would briefly be green, and then stubbornly return to gray as the sun took its toll on the tender seedlings. More wasted seed, more wasted effort. And the whole east corner of the field had gone to thorns. Without his brother's help in tending the land, they had sprung up, unbidden, unwanted. It was discouraging how quickly a bad crop could overtake a good one. It was as though the bad delighted in choking out the good, claiming more and more and more territory as its own. Soon enough, too soon really, all of his seed was scattered, and his seed pouch empty. And to what end? Much of it was bird seed, another part wasted on the rock, and the brambles looked like they'd be the stronger crop this year. The sower felt discouraged, worried. Last year hadn't been great. Another not great year would mean not only less in the barns, but even less seed for next season, and maybe not enough profit to pay the taxes. Maybe not enough profit to keep the land. A sower came back from sowing, but it didn't feel like sowing seeds of hope. More like sowing doubt or anxiety or despair. But the sower was not in charge of the crop, only in charge of the sowing. I'll say that again. The sower was not in charge of the crop, just the sowing. And let me tell you, those who have ears to hear, that not one but two unexpected things occurred. The first was that the rains came at last. Even though it had seemed like they would never fall again, the rains came, and they fell soft and warm upon the fields. And while little enough seed had seemed to land on decent soil, the yield came back an astonishing abundance. A fourfold yield would be average, expected. A tenfold yield would be exceptional, unexpectedly good. But this yield, 30-fold in some sections of the field, 60-fold in other sections, and in some sections 100-fold, 10 times exceptional, 10 times amazing. Despite birds, despite boulders, despite brambles, despite the foregoing season of dryness and drought, that's how the kingdom of heaven works. That's how God rolls. The parable reminds the sower holds only the seed, but God holds the future. Not that the sower's part is irrelevant. Seed not sown will never sprout. But this is the sermon I needed to hear. Whatever good we can sow in this world, however small it may seem, however great the obstacles may appear, that seed holds the potential to do great things, and that is why we must not grow discouraged in the sowing. But I mentioned that two unexpected things occurred. The astonishing yield from the good soil was only the first. But the second is that the wasted seed was not wasted. Not fully. It was less efficient, perhaps, or less spectacular in its outcome, but some of it fed the birds. And as the season went on, those same birds that had eaten the seed before it could sprout ate a summer's worth of crop-threatening insects after the seeds began to sprout. And this may seem a little indelicate, but what goes into a bird also comes out of a bird. And little patches of wild wheat began to sprout in some unexpected corners of the farmer's fields. And the seed that fell on rocky soil, well, it didn't amount to much. Not this year, or next year, or even the year after that, perhaps not in one farmer's lifetime. But here and there, in a crack or a crevice, a few stray seeds took root. And sparse though they were, they broke up the soil just enough for some water to penetrate. And that water etched and eroded and froze and thawed, enough that in successive years, just a few more seeds might find hospitable soil. Again, not a bumper crop, but an unexpected, unplanned result. And the brambles. Well, there are always brambles. And the seeds that fall among them won't feed people. But they'll feed field mice. And field mice are part of a larger, more intricate ecosystem. They burrow and hoard seeds that may sprout and germinate and ultimately aid soil health. And the mice also provide food for foxes and hawks and snakes, which in turn keep moles and voles and rabbits in check, so that even the seed that falls among the briars may contribute indirectly to the flourishing of the seed that lands in the good soil. You just never know, do you? You just never know. The point of the parable from this unexpected perspective is that God doesn't plant in straight rows. That what seems like wasted effort or wasted seed is seldom really so, because God works in the unseen as often as in the seen, and God's work in the world and among God's people is beautifully unpredictable and nonlinear. Despite all evidence to the contrary, and in some seasons there is much evidence to the contrary, God's kingdom is among us, at work in the very midst of us. And our trust and our hope and our prayer is that God's kingdom will ultimately come and God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. A sower went out to sow, scattering good seed with every step, just broadcasting it, trusting that no good is wasted in this world. And whatever good is scattered returns something, and the something that returns is often unexpected. Amen.